AITA for refusing to move my wedding date just because my golden child brother got engaged after me? I never thought my engagement would tear my family apart, but looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming. My name is Ethan, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived in the shadow of my older brother, Marcus. Growing up, our parents made it clear who the golden child was. Marcus excelled at everything: sports, academics, charm, while I was the quiet, reliable one. The one who helped mom with groceries, fixed dad's computer, and listened to my sister Olivia's relationship dramas. I was the family safety net, always there but rarely acknowledged. But then I met Caitlin at a colleague's wedding. She was dazzling in a midnight blue dress, laughing as she attempted to teach elderly guests how to do the Cupid shuffle. When our eyes met across the dance floor, I felt something shift in my universe. That night, we talked until the venue staff began stacking chairs around us. Caitlin was different from anyone I'd dated before. She saw me, really saw me, not as Marcus's less impressive brother, but as someone worthy in my own right. 2 years later, I proposed at the botanical gardens where we'd had our third date. When she said yes, I felt like I'd finally found my place in the world. The trouble started when I announced our engagement at my parents' monthly Sunday dinner. My mother's reaction was lukewarm at best. "Oh, that's nice," she said, her eyes immediately darting to Marcus, who was uncharacteristically quiet. "Have you set a date?" "We're thinking June 15th next year," Caitlin answered, her hand squeezing mine under the table. "The venue we love had a cancellation." My father nodded absently while scrolling through his phone. "Sounds fine. Just make sure it doesn't interfere with Marcus's promotion timeline. The firm usually announces partnerships in June." I felt Caitlin tense beside me. My sister Olivia, always observant, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Dinner continued with the usual pattern. Marcus dominating the conversation with stories about his legal career while everyone hung on his every word. I was used to this, but seeing Caitlin witness it firsthand made me uncomfortable. She kept glancing at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. Later that night, as we drove home, she finally spoke what we were both thinking. "Your family doesn't seem very excited about our engagement." "They're just like that," I said lamely. "They'll warm up to the idea." 3 days later, my phone exploded with notifications. Marcus had proposed to his girlfriend of 6 months, Victoria, in an elaborate display at our parents' country club. There were professional photographers, champagne fountains, and apparently a violinist. The family group chat was flooded with photos and congratulatory messages. My mother called immediately. "Ethan, have you seen the news? Isn't it wonderful? Marcus and Victoria are perfect together. The Prescotts are thrilled. Her father's firm might even merge with your father's company." I murmured appropriate responses while a sick feeling settled in my stomach. Then came the bombshell. "Honey," my mother continued, her voice taking on that syrupy tone she used when asking for something, "Marcus and Victoria are planning their wedding for June 10th next year, at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Wouldn't it be special if you and Caitlin postponed yours a bit? Maybe to fall? That way we could focus on one celebration at a time, and your father and I wouldn't be stretched so thin with planning." I nearly dropped my phone. "Mom, we've already put deposits down. The venue, the caterer." "Oh, Ethan," she interrupted, "you know your father will cover any fees. This is your brother's big moment. Victoria's family is quite prominent, and this wedding will be the event of the season. You've always been so understanding." Marcus specifically mentioned how much he values your support. The conversation that followed was like wading through quicksand. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank. My mother skillfully deployed every emotional manipulation tactic in her arsenal, from family unity to reminding me how Marcus had always looked out for me. By the time we hung up, I felt disoriented and guilty, even though I'd stood my ground. When I told Caitlin, her reaction surprised me. She didn't cry or yell. Instead, she became very still, a dangerous calm settling over her features. "Call your mother back," she said finally. "Tell her we're keeping our date." "I already did," I assured her. "I told her we weren't changing anything." "Good." Caitlin nodded, then added, "Because this isn't just about a wedding date, Ethan. This is about our entire future. If we give in now, we'll be giving in forever." I knew she was right, but I had no idea how ugly things would get. That night, my phone began pinging incessantly. First Marcus. "Bro, seriously? Mom's upset. Can't you just move the date? It's not like your wedding needs much planning anyway." Then Olivia. "Dude, you know how Mom gets about Marcus. Just change it and save yourself the headache." Finally, my father. "Son, I'm disappointed. Your brother has always supported your endeavors. This behavior seems petty and immature." By midnight, I'd receive calls or messages from every family member, including cousins and my grandmother, all urging me to be reasonable. Nobody, not one person, questioned why Marcus couldn't change his date instead. Around 1 a.m., while Caitlin slept beside me, I sat on our balcony grappling with a terrible realization. My family had never viewed me as an equal. I was the supporting character in the Marcus show, expected to adjust my life to accommodate his. For 29 years, I'd accepted this role, making myself smaller to avoid rocking the boat. The next morning, I woke to an email from my mother with several fall venue options attached. "I've taken the liberty of checking availability," she wrote. "The Rosewood in October would be lovely for a smaller ceremony." Something in me snapped. I forwarded the email to Caitlin with a simple message: "I think we need to reevaluate everything, not just the wedding date." Her reply came minutes later: "I agree. But remember, whatever we decide together. You're not alone in this, Ethan." Those words, "you're not alone," hit me like a thunderbolt. For the first time, I had someone firmly in my corner, someone who saw the dynamic for what it was. I realized then that our wedding date had become symbolic of something much larger: my willingness to finally stand up for myself and the life I was building. What I didn't know then was that Marcus and my parents weren't just asking for a date change. As I would soon discover, they had far more calculated reasons for wanting to delay our wedding. Reasons tied to family secrets, financial manipulations, and a betrayal so profound it would forever change how I viewed the people who raised me. As Caitlin and I prepared for our wedding planning appointment that weekend, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Before you make any decisions, there's something you should know about your brother and the family business. Meet me at Riverside Park, 2 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone." The sender had attached a photo that made my blood run cold, a document with my signature on it, one I had no memory of signing. I showed Caitlin, my hands shaking. "What do you think this means?" She studied the message, her expression grave. "I think," she said finally, "that your decision to keep our wedding date may have triggered something bigger than we imagined." She was right. But neither of us could have predicted just how deep the deception went, or how my entire understanding of my family was about to be shattered. I arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early, anxiety churning in my stomach. The spring afternoon was pleasant enough. Cherry blossoms dotting the walkways, families enjoying picnics on the grass, but I barely noticed, scanning faces and checking my phone obsessively. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman in her mid-40s approached my bench. She wore business casual attire and carried a leather portfolio. There was something vaguely familiar about her, though I couldn't place where I might have seen her before. "Ethan Reynolds?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Diana Spencer. I worked as your father's executive assistant for 12 years. Now I remembered. She'd been at numerous company functions over the years, always in the background, efficiently managing details. She'd left the company about 2 years ago, with little explanation. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting beside me. "What I'm about to share involves significant risk to my career and possibly my safety, but I can no longer remain silent." Diana opened her portfolio and removed several documents. "Your father's company, Reynolds Enterprises, isn't what you think it is. For the past decade, your father and brother have been systematically siphoning funds from the company pension plan to finance personal investments and cover losses from Marcus's reckless ventures." My mind reeled. That can't be true. My father built that company from nothing. He wouldn't. "I thought the same," Diana interrupted gently. "I admired your father for years. But then I started noticing discrepancies in the accounting. Transfers that didn't make sense. Projects that existed only on paper." She handed me a stack of papers: bank statements, transfer authorizations, email printouts. When I raised concerns, your father assured me everything was above board. Then one day, I was asked to process this. She produced a document bearing my signature, authorizing the transfer of $1.2 million from the pension fund to an offshore account. The same document from the photo in the mysterious text. "I never signed this," I whispered, staring at what appeared to be my own handwriting. "No, you didn't," Diana confirmed. "Your signature was forged. But here's why this concerns your wedding. There's an investigation brewing. Federal authorities have been gathering evidence for months. I believe indictments are imminent." "What does this have to do with my wedding date?" I asked, though a sick feeling told me I already knew. "Your brother's hasty engagement and wedding plans aren't coincidental. The Prescott family, Victoria's family, owns one of the largest private banking operations on the East Coast. A merger between Reynolds and Prescott would provide access to financial channels that could help obscure the fraudulent activities. But more importantly, if Marcus marries Victoria before any charges are filed, certain assets could be shielded through marital property protections." I struggled to process this information. "And my wedding?" Diana's expression softened with sympathy. "Your wedding presents a problem for them. Society columns would feature both Reynolds' weddings close together, drawing unwanted attention. More importantly, you're slated to receive your inheritance trust on your wedding day. It was structured that way in your grandmother's will, a clause your parents likely thought you'd never discover." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My grandmother had passed away when I was in college. I'd always been close to her. She was the one family member who seemed to value me for myself. I remembered her telling me once that she'd made provisions for my future, but I'd assumed she meant the modest savings bonds she'd given me for graduation. How much? I managed to ask. $3 million, Diana replied, plus controlling interest in a commercial property portfolio worth approximately $12 million. Your grandmother was far wealthier than your parents ever revealed to you, and she didn't trust your father to manage her assets. My head spun. This explained so much. My parents' lukewarm reaction to my engagement, their insistence that I postpone my wedding, even Marcus's suspiciously timed proposal. If your wedding happens as scheduled, Diana continued, you'd gain access to resources that could potentially expose everything. You'd have the financial independence to ask questions they don't want asked. Questions like why your signature appears on documents you never signed, or why pension fund reserves have dwindled by 60% in 5 years. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I was deeply grateful she had. Diana closed her portfolio. I worked for your father for 12 years. During that time, I watched how they treated you. Always the afterthought, always expected to accommodate Marcus. I also saw how skillfully your father manipulated people, including me. When I finally realized what was happening with the company finances, I tried to confront him. The next day, I was terminated, with threats of legal action if I spoke out. She paused, a flash of vulnerability crossing her features. But it's more than that. Your grandmother, Eleanor, she was kind to me. When my daughter needed specialized medical treatment, Eleanor quietly arranged everything. She told me once that you were the only one who inherited her moral compass. I believe she was right. Diana handed me a USB drive. This contains everything I've collected over the past 2 years, financial records, correspondence, evidence of the forged signatures. I've provided copies to the authorities, but you deserve to know what you're up against. As our meeting concluded, Diana offered one final piece of advice. Be careful who you trust, Ethan. Your family will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their secrets. And remember, this isn't just about money. People's retirement funds, their future security, it's all at risk. Good people who worked hard their entire lives. I walked home in a daze, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. The realization that my family, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, had been using me as an unwitting pawn in their financial schemes was almost too painful to bear. When I arrived home, Caitlin took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. I recounted everything Diana had told me, watching her expression shift from shock to outrage to fierce determination. We need to be strategic, she said finally. If what Diana says is true, your family won't simply back down. They'll escalate. As if on cue, my phone rang, my father. I put it on speaker. Ethan, he began without preamble. Your mother and I have been patient, but this has gone on long enough. We're family, and family supports each other. Your brother needs this wedding to happen in June. It's important for his future, for all our futures. The familiar pressure tactics washed over me, but this time, I heard them differently. The manipulation was so obvious now. Actually, Dad, I said calmly, I've been thinking about family support. It's interesting how that always seems to flow in one direction. There was a pause. What's that supposed to mean? It means we're keeping our wedding date, June 15th, as planned. His tone instantly hardened. I see. Well, if that's your attitude, perhaps we should revisit certain arrangements. Your position at the company, for instance. The down payment assistance we offered for your house. These things aren't entitlements, son. The threats were predictable, but they no longer held power over me. Do what you feel is necessary, Dad. Caitlin and I will manage. After hanging up, I plugged in the USB drive. What we found confirmed everything Diana had said, and worse. There were documents showing my authorization of multiple transactions I knew nothing about, conversations about using my credentials to access restricted accounts, and most disturbingly, discussions about how to handle me if I ever discovered what was happening. My God, Caitlin whispered, staring at the screen. They've been using you as their fall guy. If this ever came to light, the paper trail would point directly to you. The realization was chilling. My family hadn't just been dismissive of my needs. They'd been actively setting me up to take the blame for their financial crimes. That night, we made 3 decisions. First, we would proceed with our wedding as planned. Second, we would consult with a lawyer about the evidence Diana had provided. And third, we would tell no one about what we discovered, not yet. The next morning, I received a text from Olivia. We need to talk. Not at Mom and Dad's. Meet me at Westlake Coffee at 1. Come alone. I showed Caitlin, who frowned. Be careful. We don't know where Olivia stands in all this. She's my sister, I said. I've always been able to talk to her. Yes, Caitlin replied, squeezing my hand. But you've never threatened the family dynasty before. As I headed to meet Olivia, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a new phase of this conflict, one that would test every relationship I'd ever known and force me to confront the bitter truth about the family I thought I understood. Westlake Coffee was crowded when I arrived, the lunch rush in full swing. I spotted Olivia in the back corner, hunched over her laptop, dark hair falling across her face. At 31, she was between Marcus and me in age, and had always been the family peacekeeper. Growing up, she'd been my closest ally, the one who'd notice when I was feeling left out and make efforts to include me. I ordered a black coffee and made my way to her table. She looked up, and I was struck by the shadows under her eyes. "Thanks for coming," she said, closing her laptop. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" I settled into the chair across from her. "You're my sister." She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "Things are a mess, aren't they? This wedding date situation." "It's not about the date, Liv. You know that." "Maybe not entirely," she conceded. "But Ethan, you have to understand, Marcus's wedding is important for the family. The Prescott connection opens doors we've been trying to access for years." I watched her carefully, wondering how much she knew. "And my wedding? What about my doors?" She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Your situation is different. Caitlin is lovely, but she doesn't bring strategic advantages." "I'm not saying that's fair, but it's reality." "Strategic advantages," I repeated flatly. "Like Victoria's family banking connections?" Something flickered in Olivia's eyes, surprise, perhaps concern. "Among other things. Look, I know it seems like Mom and Dad favor Marcus. It doesn't seem that way, Liv. It is that way. It always has been." I leaned forward. "But there's more going on here than favoritism, isn't there?" Her gaze darted around the cafe before returning to me. "What do you mean?" "I think you know. The company finances. The pension fund. The forged signatures." Color drained from Olivia's face. "Who have you been talking to? Does it matter?" "What matters is whether it's true." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, I saw resignation. "It's complicated, Ethan. Dad and Marcus, they've made some decisions that look questionable on paper. But they had reasons. The economic downturn, expansion costs. Stop." My voice was sharper than intended, drawing glances from nearby tables. I lowered it. "Are you seriously defending fraud? People's retirement savings, Olivia. Their futures. They're going to fix it," she insisted. "The Prescott merger will infuse enough capital to replenish everything, with no one the wiser. It's just temporary." "You knew," I said, the betrayal cutting deep. "All this time, you knew what they were doing. What they were setting me up for." She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. "I only found out recently," she said. "After I joined the board last year. By then, it was already in motion. And yes, I hate how they've used your credentials. I've told them repeatedly it has to stop. But you didn't tell me," I pointed out. "You let me remain in the dark, vulnerable." Guilt shadowed her features. "I was trying to protect you. If you didn't know, you couldn't be implicated. Except I'm already implicated, aren't I? My signature is all over those transactions." Olivia didn't deny it. Instead, she opened her purse and withdrew a flash drive similar to Diana's. "Here. This contains evidence proving the signatures aren't yours." Dad kept exemplars of everyone's signatures, paranoid about intellectual property theft, and there are subtle differences in the forged versions. "This also has timestamps showing you were elsewhere during many of the authorizations, traveling, and meetings with documented attendance." I stared at the drive. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because you're my brother, and what they're doing to you is wrong." She pushed it toward me. "But Ethan, you need to be careful. Dad and Marcus, they're not thinking clearly right now. The pressure from potential discovery, the timeline with the merger, they're desperate." "Desperate enough to what? Threaten me? Set me up to take the fall?" Her silence was answer enough. "Jesus, Liv. These are our parents. Our brother." "I know." She looked miserable. "That's why I wanted to meet. To warn you. They're planning something." "What kind of something?" "I don't know exactly. I overheard them discussing contingency measures if you refuse to postpone the wedding. Marcus mentioned something about Caitlin finding leverage." Ice formed in my veins. "If they go anywhere near her." "They won't," Olivia said quickly. I made it clear that was a line they couldn't cross. "But they're exploring other options. Financial pressure. Professional sabotage. Dad's got connections throughout the industry." I laughed bitterly. "So basically, they're going to try to ruin my life because I won't change my wedding date to accommodate their fraud scheme?" "Put that way, it sounds horrible." "It is horrible, Liv. It's sociopathic." We sat in silence for a moment, the cheerful cafe ambience at odds with the darkness of our conversation. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. It was the million-dollar question. The moral choice was clear: expose everything, consequences be damned. But the personal cost would be devastating. Not just to me, but to everyone connected to Reynolds Enterprises, employees, retirees, partners. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I won't be their scapegoat." Olivia nodded, then glanced at her watch. "I should go. Dad's expecting me at a board meeting." She hesitated. "Whatever you decide, be careful. And Ethan. I'm sorry. For not telling you sooner. For not being braver." As she gathered her things, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "The inheritance from grandmother. Did you know about that too?" She paused, looking genuinely confused. "What inheritance?" Either she was an exceptional actress, or this was one secret she hadn't been privy to. "Never mind," I said. "Thanks for the warning." After Olivia left, I remained at the table, turning both flash drives over in my hands. Two sets of evidence from two different sources. The question was, which one told the complete truth? And what other secrets remained buried? My phone buzzed with a text from Caitlin. Everything okay? Been a while. I typed back, heading home now. Got some new information. Not sure who to trust. Her reply came quickly. Trust your instincts. And me. Always me. That simple message centered me. Amidst all the deception and betrayal, Caitlin remained my North Star, the one person whose motivations I never questioned. As I walked home, my phone rang again. Marcus. I let it go to voicemail, but checked the message immediately. Ethan, this childish behavior needs to stop. You're causing Mom unnecessary stress. Dad's arranging a family meeting tonight at 7. Attendance is mandatory if you want to remain part of this family. And come alone. This doesn't concern Caitlin. The command to come without Caitlin confirmed my suspicions. Tonight would be an ambush, an orchestrated pressure campaign. Well, two could play at strategy. I called my childhood friend Devin, now a digital security specialist. I need a favor, I explained. Something discreet. By the time I reached home, I had a plan. Not a perfect one, but one that would at least level the playing field. Caitlin listened intently as I recounted my conversation with Olivia and showed her both drives. We need to compare these, she said. See if the stories align or contradict. We spent the next 2 hours poring over documents, creating timelines, and identifying key evidence. What emerged was a chilling picture of systematic fraud, with my family at the center and me positioned as the potential fall guy. You can't go to that family meeting alone, Caitlin insisted when I told her about Marcus's message. I won't be alone, I assured her, showing her the small recording device Devin had couriered over. And I need them to believe they have the upper hand. It's the only way to get them to reveal everything. She looked unconvinced. It's dangerous, Ethan. These people, your family, they've shown they're willing to sacrifice you to save themselves. I know, I said quietly. That's why we need to be smarter than they are. As 7 o'clock approached, we finalized our contingency plans. If I didn't check in by 9, Caitlin would contact our lawyer with copies of everything we'd discovered. If any threats were made, I'd use a predetermined phrase to alert her. Before leaving, I held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Whatever happens tonight, I promised, we're getting married on June 15th, exactly as planned. Yes, we are, she agreed. And Ethan? Remember who you are, not who they've tried to make you believe you are. With those words fortifying me, I headed to my parents' house, the place where I'd grown up, where I'd spent decades trying to earn approval that was never forthcoming. Tonight, that dynamic would end, one way or another. What I didn't know was that someone else had been watching our family drama unfold. Someone with their own agenda and their own secrets. Someone who was about to change everything. My parents' house, a sprawling colonial in Westchester County, loomed against the darkening sky as I pulled into the circular driveway. Marcus's Audi and Olivia's Volvo were already there, parked alongside my father's Mercedes and mother's Range Rover. A display of Reynolds' prosperity, lined up like soldiers. I'd grown up in this house, but tonight it felt foreign, even hostile. Before exiting my car, I activated the recording device, securing it in my jacket's inner pocket. Devin had assured me it would capture clear audio even through clothing. The housekeeper, Elena, answered the door with her usual warm smile. A reminder that not everyone in this house participated in the family's darker dealings. They're in the study, Mr. Ethan, she said, taking my coat. Of course they were. The study was my father's power center, designed to intimidate with its dark wood paneling, imposing desk, and wall of academic and professional achievements, mostly Marcus's, with a few token acknowledgments of Olivia's and my accomplishments. I paused in the hallway, steeling myself. Through the partially open door, I could hear my family's voices. Should be here by now, my mother was saying. I still think we're taking the wrong approach. Ethan responds better to gentler persuasion. My father scoffed. Gentle persuasion hasn't worked, Helen. The boy needs to understand what's at stake. He's not a boy, Dad, Olivia objected. He's 29, with a successful career and a fiancée who actually sees his worth. Which is precisely the problem, Marcus cut in. This Caitlin woman has filled his head with ideas about standing up for himself. Before her, he was manageable. Manageable, Olivia repeated flatly. Like he's a problem to be contained, not your son. I'd heard enough. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. For heads turned toward me. My father behind his desk, my mother perched on the leather sofa, Marcus standing by the fireplace with a whiskey in hand, and Olivia in the window seat, slightly apart from the others. Ethan, my father greeted me with practiced warmth that didn't reach his eyes. Join us. We were just discussing family matters. Yes, I heard, I said calmly, declining the offered seat. I'm manageable without Caitlin's influence, apparently. Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable. My father, however, merely smiled thinly. You've always been prone to eavesdropping, he observed. A trait that's proved problematic recently. So they knew I discovered something. The question was, how much did they think I knew? I didn't realize family meetings required secrecy, I replied. But then, a lot happens in this family without my knowledge. That's why we've gathered tonight, my father said. moving into what I recognized as his negotiation posture. Relaxed shoulders, open palms. To clear the air. But first, a drink? He gestured toward the bar cart. I declined with a shake of my head, needing full clarity for what was coming. Very well. He settled back. Ethan, it's come to our attention that you may have been given some misleading information about family business matters. Information that's causing unnecessary friction. Misleading information, I repeated. You mean like the fact that you and Marcus have been systematically draining the company pension fund? Or that you forged my signature on documents authorizing illegal transfers? Or perhaps you mean my grandmother's inheritance that you've kept hidden from me? The room went deathly silent. My mother's hand flew to her throat, her telltale gesture when blindsided. Marcus's jaw tightened, while my father's expression remained unchanged, though I noticed a slight twitch in his left eye. Only Olivia looked unsurprised, giving me an almost imperceptible nod of approval. You've been speaking to Diana Spencer, my father finally said, his voice dangerously soft. A disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta, hardly a reliable source. I've been speaking to several sources, I countered, and reviewing quite a lot of documentation. Bank transfers, board minutes, email correspondence. The picture they paint isn't pretty. My father exchanged glances with Marcus, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then his demeanor shifted, becoming almost apologetic. Son, the business world is complex. Sometimes measures that appear questionable from the outside are necessary strategic maneuvers. The pension fund adjustments were temporary, a liquidity measure during market volatility. Everything is being restored, with interest. It was the same justification Olivia had offered, the temporary narrative. I wondered if they actually believed it themselves. And my forged signatures? I pressed. The transactions made in my name without my knowledge or consent. Was that also a strategic maneuver? Marcus stepped forward. That was my call, he admitted, with practiced contrition. We needed authorization for certain time-sensitive transactions while you were unavailable. I instructed the financial team to proceed using your credentials, intending to have you retroactively approve everything. A procedural shortcut, nothing more. A procedural shortcut, I echoed incredulously. That's what you call fraud? Ethan, my mother interjected, her voice quavering with emotion that seemed genuine. Please try to understand. Your father and brother have been under immense pressure. The company supports hundreds of families, including ours. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good. I looked at her, really looked, wondering if she truly believed what she was saying, or if she'd simply perfected the art of self-deception. And grandmother's inheritance? I asked. Was hiding that also for the greater good? My father's expression darkened. Your grandmother's testamentary wishes were complicated by legal technicalities. We've been waiting for the appropriate time. The appropriate time, I interrupted, being never, or at least, not until after I'd postponed my wedding to accommodate Marcus's convenient engagement to Victoria Prescott. Marcus slammed his glass down. Don't bring Victoria into this. Our engagement has nothing to do with company matters. Doesn't it? I challenged. The timing seems remarkably convenient. Just as federal authorities are closing in on the pension fund irregularities, you suddenly propose to the daughter of one of the most influential banking families in the region. A family whose financial channels could help obscure questionable transactions. The blood drained from Marcus's face, confirming my suspicions. My father, however, maintained his composure. These conspiracy theories are beneath you, Ethan, he said dismissively. You've allowed yourself to be manipulated by outside influences, this Diana woman, and perhaps your fiancé as well. It's disappointing. I felt a flare of anger but kept my voice steady. Don't you dare bring Caitlin into this. She's the one person who's never lied to me, never manipulated me, never used me as a convenient scapegoat. No one is using you as a scapegoat, my father insisted, though his gaze flickered away. Another tell. Then explain this. I withdrew copies of several documents from my pocket, transaction authorizations bearing my signature, dated when I'd been out of the country. These transfers moved pension funds to offshore accounts under my authorization, allegedly. Except I was in Tokyo when these were signed. A fact easily verified through passport records and hotel receipts. My mother gasped softly. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, as if pained. Marcus looked to our father, who maintained his facade of calm. Administrative errors, my father said smoothly, easily corrected. If you'd brought these concerns to me directly, instead of engaging in this theatrical confrontation, we could have resolved everything quietly. Quietly, I noted, the way you do everything. Behind closed doors, with selected truth, manipulating people's perception until they doubt their own reality. The study fell silent again. The only sound the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. A wedding gift to my parents, ironically. My father finally sighed. an elaborate show of patience. Ethan, what exactly do you want? If this is about your wedding date,